page 27a, and we learned yesterday about a number of cases that it talks about in the Mishnah in Idias. Idias is a tractate of Mishnayos, the tractate of sayings of the Tanoim that was considered the final verdict, the final rulings on many areas where they weren't sure of what the halacha was. So what happened was, we're going to learn about it a little later, so I don't want to give you the full details. It is in this chapter. But it's a story of, there was a difference of opinion of how should a teacher teach? Should they be very selective in their students, or should they be very open to accepting as many students as are interested in learning? And the day that the new rabbi was chosen, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he said, no, we got to change the whole method that was used. And he said, we got to add benches in the Beis Medrash. We're going to keep the doors open. Anyone that wants to come can come and listen and participate. It says that day there was a huge amount of Torah study because everyone came to the Beis Medrash that day, and they weren't selective who was allowed to come. And they had a tremendous amount of people there, and they were able to delve into the depths of every halacha, and they came to conclusions. And so we mentioned here that the Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified about 5 matters on that day, and those were the final verdicts in these things. And the main halacha that he testified was that interested us was the fact that the halacha of Shacharis, which is based on the sacrifice, the morning sacrifice, that morning sacrifice was brought in the 4th hour. And that 4th hour, it wasn't just, it was up to the 4th hour, but it was brought in the 4th hour. And that was a proof that what we saw from there, what we understood from that is that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, that you have until the 4th hour. And when it says until the 4th hour, it means until and including the 4th hour. And we also mentioned the other laws that it mentions in that same Mishnah about, had to do with Yibum, when there are 2 sisters married to 2 brothers, and one of them was married biblically, the other one was only married rabbinically, because one of them was an adult, the other one was a child. So there's a way of doing Yibum, and because if it's only a rabbinic marriage, it can be annulled, and we encourage the girl to annul the marriage in order that her sister, whose husband passed away, can do the Yibum marriage, the Levirate marriage, which is marrying the brother of her husband, and this way they can fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum. And that was one law. Another law had to do with a chicken that killed a child, and that the law is that it gets stoned. And we had the law about wine, 40 days old, 40 days fermenting is considered good fermentation, and it can be poured on the mizbeach as wine. It can be considered fit to be poured on the altar. And also, if a woman's husband died and we only have one witness, that's considered acceptable. One witness that testifies that a man died, to allow the woman to go and marry another man. And we're not afraid of there being an issue of adultery, that maybe her husband is really still alive, and she's going to now be marrying another husband, and she'll end up with committing the terrible sin of adultery. We're not afraid of that. One witness is considered good enough that if he says that he saw that her husband died. And so that was the conclusion of the previous Gemara. And then we had the next Gemara that talked about the 4th hour and the 6th hour of the day. And we mentioned that it seems from the initial thought of the Gemara that the term biker, the term morning, really is before the fourth hour. So what the Gemara's understanding is that the rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis are talking about the morning prayer. It would seem like that's based on when is the morning. If this is the morning prayer, when is the morning? And this verse that talks about the morning being before the fourth hour, it seems that doesn't fit with any of the opinions of our Mishnah. The Gemara concluded and said that it's not a problem, and so the way that they'll understand the verse that talks about the shemesh, the sun being hot and melting the mana, it's not a contradiction because we can fit that together with the rabbis, or we can fit it together with Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not a problem because it either means an earlier, you divide the morning in half, and there's two parts to the morning, or it's an hour before the end of the morning, and ultimately we're able to understand the argument between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda is when is the morning, and that was it added a little to our understanding of what it meant, what was the argument about. Because Rabbi Yehuda says you have until 4 hours, the rabbis say you have until noon. What was their argument about? It really boils down to what is considered biker, what is considered morning. So this Gemara adds a little to our previous understanding when we're talking about what is the source of the argument. We never really the Gemara didn't really clarify what the source of the argument is, but this Gemara seems to say that it's based on what the term that they seem to argue on what the word biker means, and ultimately that connects to the sacrifices, because that was also part of this discussion is when was the sacrifices allowed to be brought, and so that is it adds a little explanation. Yes, Yehuda.
Yeah, but doesn't the Gemara say in another spot the definition of morning when you can say the Shema?
Right. The only thing is that when it talks about Shema, it uses a term waking up. It doesn't talk about morning. It talks about b'shachbecha uvekumecha, getting up. So it's not based on morning. It's based on getting up and going to sleep. And so these are different terms. Again, there's laws that have to do with day and night. There's laws that have to do with morning, the morning, and there's laws that have to do with waking up. And each of these are fall into different categories, different rules of when the time limit is. And so this is we're talking about biker. And it also mentions the word biker when it talks about it mentions the word biker when it talks about the sacrifices. Es hakeves ha'echad ta'aseh v'biker. So what does biker really mean? You should bring the sacrifice, the sheep, in the morning. So that's this Gemara tells us that is the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. What does it mean, biker, the morning? And it's interesting that yesterday we also in the afternoon we were learning about the story of the war with Yavesh Gilad, the people of Yavesh Gilad against the Ammonites, and that the Jewish people told Yavesh Gilad, "We will come to your rescue when the sun is hot, Necham Hashemesh." And so it seemed a little problematic that statement with the way we understood our Gemara here, because over there one of the commentaries says the sun gets hot meant noontime, and here our Gemara says that the sun gets hot means the fourth hour. So it's an interesting question. I saw the commentaries do touch upon it. There is one of the commentaries does touch upon it. We also spoke about a medrash. And the medrash is brought, there's a medrash that I mentioned yesterday about King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. Medrash is brought in a Tosfos in Menachos. It's brought in another tractate, and it brings down this story about King Solomon sleeping through, and his mother had to wake him up. It's a Rashi brings it in Mishlei in the book of Proverbs in the last chapter 31, and the truth is, it is in the Rabbeinu Yoina in the commentary in the back of the Gemara here. He brings it, and the way they explain, he brings this medrash here. He says, King Shloima Melech would normally sleep until 3 hours of the day, like it says that was the norm for kings. Derech B'nai Malachim was to get up in the 3rd hour. And one time, the daughter of Paroi caused him to make a mistake, and he slept until the 4th hour. And they brought the sacrifice in the 4th hour. And this was the testimony of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So this is how the Rabbeinu Yoina brings it. But in the other places, it gives a little more explanation that somehow Shlomo HaMelech had the keys to the Beis HaMikdash, and he slept on the keys. He slept, so his mother they didn't have the key to get in to bring the sacrifice. So it wasn't that Shlomo HaMelech would have brought the sacrifice. He wasn't a kohen. But it was that he slept on the keys of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, I saw another place where it mentions this medrash, and it says that this was the first night that they inaugurated the Beis HaMikdash, is when he married Bas Paroi. So this was that night he married Bas Paroi, and I guess he still hadn't delegated the keys of the Beis HaMikdash to anyone else, and that's why he ended up sleeping on the keys and it was under his pillow or under his mattress, and his mother had to come and wake him up in order for them to bring the carbon. That's why it ended up being late, but it was brought at the 4th hour, and that's how that was the testimony of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, that's the story that he heard. Okay, so now we're up to the next Gemara, Tfilas Hamincha Ad Ha'erev, and we actually, yes.
I think we studied about the time the kings are sleeping before.
Yeah, we did mention about the kings. So this story is a continuation of that Mishnah, because that Mishnah spoke about the derech of B'nai Malachim to get up in the 3rd hour. They sleep in.
Right.
But they
I
get up.
don't remember if it was a Matai or if it was with the Kohanim jumping on the dead bodies' caskets. But it was one of those two.
It was on page 9b. It said, when do you say the Shema in the morning?
Oh,
and
okay.
Then it said, until when?
Yeah.
And Rabbi Yeshua says, until 3 hours, Shekain derech melachim, that's the way of kings, to stand in 3 hours, during the 3rd hour of the day.
Yeah.
So that was the time that you could say the Shema until then, which means that the Jewish people, we are considered like kings. Giving that's the time of when the Torah says when you wake up, it's referring to when kings wake up.
Well, so, B'nai kings, at least.
What is that?
B'nai kings.
B'nai, right. But the Mishnah says kings. But when Rabbeinu Yoina here quotes it, he says B'nai Malachim. He quotes
B'nai, okay, that's us.
But the Mishnah says kings. There are different times in the Talmud where it talks about kings or B'nai Malachim, or the children of kings. It's interesting. Okay, so now we're talking about the prayer of Mincha, and when it came to Mincha, here the Gemara is wondering who the halacha follows. We earlier said,
Rabbi.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a question. When it says like kings or the children of kings sleep till this and this hour, I thought that was like a negative admonition against the Jewish people that, you shouldn't be like a king. You're like a person who has to get up and go to work. you think you're the king, you can sleep in till 9 o'clock. A regular person gets up and does stuff before the king. The king has special privileges because he's the king. He can sleep until late. But a regular person, you got stuff to do. So I thought that was like a negative thing that the time of king sleeping until the hour.
Well, when it says b'shachbacha uvakumecha, when you lie down, go to sleep, when you wake up and you get up, that's when you have to say Shema. And the Mishnah says that that's based on the fact that that's when kings get up. That would be the deadline. So it's acceptable to, we rely on that as a time when it's called Uva Kumecha. It's still called Uva Kumecha. We don't look at the kings as they're not part of the equation, and it's talking about the normal person. We consider consider the fact that kings get up then as part of the norm. That's part of the regular rule. So therefore, now I'm not encouraging you to get up at the third hour of the day. You might, it's advisable to get up earlier, but that is acceptable as part of the, reciting the Shema. That's the time that's the deadline of reciting the Shema is when kings get up. But there was a statement, what you're saying is not wrong, because there was a statement of David HaMelech that David HaMelech said that I get up 2 ashmurais, I get up 2 watchings before the regular kings, because the kings get up in the third hour of the day, and kidmu einai ashmurais, my eyes in chapter 119 of the Tehillim, I believe. Kidmu einai ashmurais, my eyes get up 2 ashmurais, 2 periods of 4 hours, 2 watchings before dawn, which means I get up at midnight. And that's when he used to wake up at midnight, which was 8 hours before the kings start getting up, because they get up in the third hour, which is somewhere between 8 to 9. So it does imply
I thought it was more like an admonition, like a wife would come to her husband and get up and go to work. He says, I'm sleeping in like the king. I can sleep until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, just like the king. And she says, no, you're not the king. The king has a special privilege. You got to go to work. You're not the king. I thought that was like an admonition to the regular folks. Like, you can't sleep in just because you think you're the king. You're not the king. The king can do that because he doesn't have to work or make a living, but you got to make a living. You got to get up at a normal time and daven.
Right. I didn't see that as one of the parts of the, claims women can have against men. I haven't seen that in the Talmud. You know what I mean? As that's a good line. So I'm not familiar with it. I don't know, David. But in any event, if you want to look into it, you could check it out on page 9b and check out that Mishnah and check out the commentary, see if you see anything over there. So that
King David used to wake up from his house, was,
right.
The wind would wake him up.
Right. So the Gemara here wanted to know who is the halacha like? Earlier we said the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda regarding the morning prayer, and now the Gemara is asking regarding mincha, who does the halacha follow? And now, the fact that you can daven mincha until Plag HaMincha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everyone agrees you can daven until Plag HaMincha. The question is, can you daven mincha after that? Can you daven mincha later? And the question is, can you daven Ma'ariv starting at that period that mincha ends at Plag HaMincha, halfway through mincha? And the Gemara wants to know, just because we followed Rabbi Yehuda earlier, does that mean that we should follow him here as well and say the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara says that the Ovid Kamar Ovid, whoever you follow is considered acceptable. I'm going to read this Gemara one more time. I think it's important for us to go over. So let's read it one more time. We're at the 2 dots. The Gemara is page 27a, about maybe 15 lines up from the bottom of the page. Tfilas hamincha ad ha'erev v'chulu. The afternoon prayer is until evening. And Rabbi Yehuda said until Plag HaMincha, halfway through Mincha. And we explained earlier that means until and including the first half of Mincha Ketana. The first half, it's until and including the first half of Mincha Ketana, the first hour and a quarter of the late Mincha, the Mincha Ketana, the short Mincha, which means Rabbi Yehuda says you have until, on a day that's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you have until 4:45 to daven mincha. And so Amar le Rav Chizda Rav Yitzchak. Rav Chizda asked Rav Yitzchak, Hasam Amar Rav Kahana halacha Rav Yehuda. There earlier on the page, and Rav Kahana said the halacha follows Rav Yehuda. Hayulutanan v'bechirta kavase. Since we learned in the Mishnah in the Bechirta, in the chosen tractate, the tractate that was considered the chosen tractate. It's the tractate that the halacha follows, the final verdict mentioned there. The tractate Idias is called. So halacha mai. What is the halacha here regarding the tfilas mincha? There we spoke about Shachris. We said the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. What about here? Halacha mai. Here, what is the halacha? Who is the halacha follow? Ishtik, and Rabbi Yitzchak was quiet. Amalei. He didn't say anything. He didn't answer. He didn't answer the question. Rav Chizda said, let's see ourselves. Rab davened the Shabbos prayer on Erev Shabbos day. Halacha Reb Yehuda. We hear from this that the halacha follows Reb Yehuda. So the question was, if you're allowed to daven Ma'ariv early, it would also be a question if you can daven Mincha late. And we see that Rav davened Mincha early on Friday. And what we see from there is that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. That's what it seems. He davened Mincha early, and Ma'ariv early, he accepted Shabbos early. So we see that even though it was still daytime, you could daven Ma'ariv. So that, you see from there, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Adirabba, on the contrary, Rav Huna v'Rabbanan le'hava matzli ad orta, since we know that Rav Huna and the rabbis did not daven until dark, Shema Mina ain't halacha for Rabbi Yehuda. We see from this that the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda because they didn't daven until dark. And number one, their Rebbe did daven, so it would have made sense. They should follow. Rav Huna should have followed Rav. Rav was Rav Huna's Rebbe, so you would think that Rav Huna should have followed his Rebbe, and he didn't. And obviously, he held that you shouldn't daven early. So the Gemara, we have a contradiction of who the halacha seems to follow. So the Gemara answers that the reason is that it must be that we don't have a final ruling, and whoever you want to follow, you can follow. So it says, "Hashta delayit bar hilchasa." Now that we don't have a teaching regarding the final verdict, laikamar v'laikамar, not like this rabbi, not like that rabbi. David Kamarovid, David Kamarov. If you do like this rabbi, you did okay, you did good. If you do like that rabbi, you did good, and you can follow whichever one you want. And therefore, if you want to be a plaga mincha guy, you can daven always mincha. You can always daven mincha early and then daven ma'ariv early. If you want to be a regular time, you go by shkia, daven mincha before shkia, before sunset. You can daven ma'ariv after dark. So you could follow that however you want to follow. Now, the commentaries debate. Common view is that you're supposed to follow the same thing always. But there is one opinion that says, no, you could fluctuate. One day you do one way, one day you do a different way. The main thing is that you shouldn't in the same day do something called a tarti desasri. You should not have a double contradiction. Like if you're davening mincha late, you can't daven ma'ariv early. Because if you're claiming that it's still day, how can you claim it's night also? You have to be consistent, at least in the same day. You want to today say, oh, 6 o'clock is considered night, or 5 o'clock is considered night. Let's say today you say, what's the time of Plaga Mincha? Let's say it's around 6:30. I'm guessing 6:45. So let's say you say 7 o'clock. I'm davening Ma'ariv today. Problem is, if I daven Ma'ariv today at 7, can I daven Mincha tomorrow at 7:15? Today I'm davening Ma'ariv at 7. Tomorrow I'm gonna say 7:15. I'm still davening Mincha. It's still daytime. But today I said 7 o'clock is Ma'ariv time already. Is that a problem? Can I? So if it was the same day, that would be a problem. Like I wouldn't be allowed to daven 7 o'clock Mincha in 7:15 Ma'ariv, because these are both within the same time, within the same time period, and I'm either going to claim it's nighttime or it's daytime. I have to make up my mind. I can't do a contradiction in the same day. But if today I daven Mincha at that time, tomorrow I could at the same time daven Ma'ariv because it's a different day. That's one opinion. The other opinion says no, you should be consistent throughout. If you want to follow one rabbi, follow that rabbi throughout. There are leniencies. For example, a person has an emergency situation, then you can rely on the other view. But in a regular situation, you should follow one opinion throughout. And that's the common view that's accepted. However, there is a leniency in addition to an emergency situation is Shabbos. Shabbos is another leniency, Friday night. Friday night, there's a leniency. That's why you'll find a lot of people who normally do not follow this view of Plaga Mincha, davening Ma'ariv early, but Shabbos, we make early Shabbos. They follow the early Shabbos. Why? Because there is a leniency on Friday night to daven early. And I did see a source. There are a few reasons for it. One reason of being able to daven early is the fact that the source of Ma'ariv is the reason for davening Ma'ariv. It's connected to the sacrifices. When did they? What's Ma'ariv connected to? Which part of the sacrifice? The fats and the limbs that were not burned during the day, they were burned at night. Now think about it. On Shabbos, did they burn those fats at night? No. On Shabbos, they couldn't burn them at night because those were that didn't override Shabbos. That wasn't a Shabbos sacrifice. That was a Friday sacrifice. So those limbs and fats had to be brought during the day. You brought the fats and the limbs during the day. You can daven Ma'ariv during the day, even though it's not night yet. But if it's in place of the fats and the limbs, so therefore there would be reason to rely on the early Ma'ariv on a Friday, because if it's in place of the fats and the limbs were brought during the day on a Friday, and therefore on a Friday there would be room to be lenient to daven Ma'ariv early, even if during the rest of the week you daven Mincha at that time. On Friday afternoon, you could daven theoretically Ma'ariv at that time. So that's it gives us a little understanding of why people do the early Shabbos, even if all week long they don't. I will mention that the Ariya Kadosh, or those that follow a lot of Hasidic places, they do not do the early Shabbos. They don't follow. They don't make early Shabbos. And I once heard that there's an inyan to daven mincha late, and that has to do with the fact that it's supposed to, the later it is, the more klipos, the more shells of impurity there are, and we trying to elevate those shells of impurity and refine them, and therefore davening mincha was always the Hasidim always wanted to daven it the latest option, the latest opportunity, in order to bring light and elevate those the worst of the klippas, the worst of the shells of impurity. I once saw it in a Chassidish sefer. So there is some concept of davening late. Yes, David.
Yeah, the whole idea of burning the limbs early is to avoid doing the malacha on Shabbos.
Right.
So why should that interfere with the timing of the davening of Marv? Why? Because it's they're, you know what I'm saying? It's pressed because of trying to avoid working on Shabbos. Why
Correct.
should that?
Okay, good point. But the Ma'ariv service is based on those on that sacrifice, on those limbs and on those fats. So if they would have been brought then only and not later, there's definitely reason to say that this sacrifice, that this prayer that you're doing to commemorate that would be done at the time that was done, and therefore it could be done earlier during the daytime. There's reason to do it during the daytime. You're commemorating that offering. So it's based on the earlier Gemara that the prayer is based on those fats and on those limbs. Okay, so the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says so. So what we have here is something interesting. For Shacharis, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. For Mincha, the halacha is you can choose who you want to follow, which tells us that the argument that they have at Shacharis is not the same argument that they have at Mincha. In other words, these two rabbis argue in both of these cases, but the one argument is not based on the other argument. Because if one argument would be based on the other argument, then the halacha should be a continuation, that if the halacha follows this there, then the halacha should follow the same thing in the next case. But obviously what we see here is that these two arguments are not based one on the other. And that's why the Gemara can say, in that case, the halacha follows one way. In this case, it doesn't follow the same way because the arguments are not based on the same logic. So now the Gemara continues and it says that Rav Iklal Lebei Geniva. Rav went to the house of Geniva. L'tzali shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos, and he davened Shabbos davening early on erev Shabbos. V'hava Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba la'achorei de Rav, and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba davened behind Rav. I see on the side it says a tefillah shel choil. He was davening the weekday, if I'm understanding this correctly. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was davening a weekday Shemoneh Esrei while Rav was davening the Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei. In any event, V'siyem Rav le'paski letzloisei Rabbi Yirmiyah. And when Rav finished, he did not interrupt the prayer of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So what this means is that Rav did not interrupt. He didn't want to take his 3 steps backwards and walk in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah in order to sit down. He just stood in his place. And the Gemara says, Shema Mina class, we see 3 things from here. Shmami, no, we see from here, the Spalo Ladim Shal Shabbos Erev Shabbos. Number one, Rav daven Shabbos davening, even though it was Erev Shabbos, it was before Shabbos. That's number one. You could daven my reverse. Shmami no Mispal Tefillah Talmud Achiri Rabbi. We also see from here that a student is allowed to daven behind his Rebbe, behind his teacher. And later on, the Gemara mentions this, and the Rashi and Taisus both talk about this. Does it, if you daven right behind your Rebbe, does it look like you are showing off, or does it possibly look like you're bowing down to your Rebbe? But here, Rabbi Yirmiyah davened behind him, so it says that he did it. So we see that it's okay. And Shmami no, we also see from this story, Rav did not want to interrupt Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba because you're not supposed to pass by someone who's in the middle of davening. And the reason is, in order not to interrupt them, cause them to become confused, or because you're the Shechina, it says, is right in front of a person davening. The divine presence is there. And by you walking in front of them, you are walking so to speak, walking where the Shechina really is. So this is the three things that we learn from this story. Mesayele l'Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. This proves what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says you're not allowed to do such a thing, to walk in front of someone who's davening. You'll see in shuls, if someone is davening, people don't like to walk right in front of them. So the Gemara says this seems to prove what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says. The Gemara asks, Aini, is that true? Ravami and Ravasi, they used to pass by each other and walk in front of each other. So the Gemara answers, Rabami and Ravasi, they would walk in front of each other when it was outside of 4 amas, which is 6 to 8 feet. In other words, they would walk around. They would make sure that they're not within 6 to 8 feet of the other person who's davening the Shemona Esrei. Rabbi Yirmiyah Gemara now asks, how did Rabbi Yirmiyah do this? Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, person's not supposed to daven like Keneged Rabbi, not on the same next to their Rebbe. Next to their Rebbe, because that looks like they're equal. And we just turned the page, 27b now. For those 27b, like Keneged Rabbi, Rabbi. You're not supposed to daven behind your Rebbe. And again, I mentioned earlier that the reason would be that it looks either like you feel that you're in the same league as your Rebbe, so it's some type of arrogance or haughtiness. And the other reason that Taisus over here mentions is it looks like you're gonna bow down to you're bowing down. Whenever you bow down, it looks like you're bowing down to your Rebbe. So the question is, how did Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba do this? Tanya Rabbi Eliezer says, if a person davens after behind his Rebbe, and a person who gives shalom, says shalom aleichem to his Rebbe, and he doesn't say shalom alecha Rebbe, he doesn't say it uniquely, he says it the same way he would say hello to his friend, but he doesn't make it special to his Rebbe. And here we're talking about someone who he learned most of his wisdom from. We're not talking about just someone who teaches him. We're talking someone in the olden days, they used to learn most of their teachings from one teacher. Nowadays, every class in school, you jump a grade, you go to the next grade, you have another teacher. Every year you switch teachers. So no teacher is called your Rabbi Muvhak. No teacher is really called your main teacher. Maybe someone who didn't have any Jewish education, they come to the Levi Yitzchak Senior Academy. Maybe I would be considered possibly, but they'll probably learn a lot online. They probably see things, read things. so I didn't even know if I would be able to get that title. But there is a concept of Rabbi Muvhak, a Rebbe who teaches the majority of one's wisdom. And that was common in the olden days. And there were rules about that Rebbe is considered a very strong obligation of having respect for such a teacher. And so here it mentions that Hanoisin Shalom LaRabbi, a person who gives Shalom and says Shalom Aleichem, peace to you, which was the way that you would normally greet your friend, that's inappropriate. How do you greet a Rebbe? You have to say Shalom Alecha Rebbe. You say a peace to you, teacher, master. And so Rebbe Eliezer says that if you daven behind your Rebbe, if you give Shalom Aleichem to your Rebbe the way you give it to another person, Shalom LaRabbi, or if a person responds to their Rebbe in a very simple way that they would normally respond to someone else and not showing respect to their Rebbe, and someone who competes with his Rebbe's yeshiva and opens up another yeshiva without permission and next to his Rebbe, if a person says something that he didn't hear from his Rebbe, but he says it in a way that people understand that it's his Rebbe who taught it, and really it was someone else, and he didn't say who he taught it from, and this is problematic because he's making a bad name for his Rebbe. Someone might have a question on it, and they're going to assume he's probably repeating something from his teacher, and really he heard it from someone else. And if someone has a question on it, they're going to look negative at his Rebbe. And really, it's something that he heard from someone else. It's not really from his Rebbe. And therefore, if he said it without saying the name who he heard it from, so he's repeating something that he didn't hear from his Rebbe, but implying that it's from his Rebbe. So he's goyrem l'shchina shetistalek mi Yisrael. He causes the Shechina, the divine presence, that it leaves the Jewish people. So we see from here that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, what he did was not so simple. Sounds like he did something wrong. He wasn't supposed to stand behind his Rebbe and daven. And the Gemara answers, Shani Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, the Talmud Chaver. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is different. He's what's called a Talmud Chaver. He's a student, but he's also in the same league as his Rebbe. He's somewhat in the same league. In other words, he's very knowledgeable himself, and he happens to listen to his teacher. Happens to be a student, but he's a Talmud and a friend. He's a student. Talmud Chaver means he's a student and a friend, or a student and a Talmud Chacham, and therefore it's not. He doesn't have the same rules. V'hainu dekamerle Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba l'Rav. And this is this proves that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was more like a friend and not a student. Because when Rav davened, Shabbos davening, and it was Friday, so Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked him, did you stop doing work? You just davened Ma'ariv. And the way he said it was implying that he's more of a friend than he's more of a friend than a student. And how do we see that? And that's seen because Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said to Rav, Mi badalto. He said, did you stop from doing work? You just daven Ma'ariv on Shabbos Ma'ariv early. Did you stop doing work? Amar le, and he said to him back, in Badilna, I did stop doing work. Amar, but Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba did not say it properly. If it was his Rebbe, he would have had to say it a little differently. Amar mi badil mar. He didn't say, did masters stop doing work? He just said, oh, did you stop? He was talking to him like a friend. He didn't say, did master stop doing work? So because of that, we see that he must have been more like a friend than a student, and therefore Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was allowed to daven behind him. Now the Gemara asks, did Rav really stop doing work? Umi badil? Did he really stop doing work when he davened Ma'ariv? V'amar Rav Avin, doesn't Rav Avin say, Pam achas, Rav Avin said that one time, his follow Rebbe daven shel Shabbos, the Shabbos davening, the Erev Shabbos early, the nichnas lemerchos, and he entered into a bathhouse. The yotza, and he left. The shana lan perek, and so he had already davened Ma'ariv of Shabbos. He entered a bathhouse. He taught us our teaching. He taught us a shir, shana lan perek, he taught us our chapter. V'adayan loy choshcha, and it still was not dark. And you see, what did he do? He went into a bathhouse. And going into a bathhouse was prohibited on Shabbos for various reasons in the rabbinic decrees against entering a bathhouse on Shabbos. And we see that he did that even after he davened Ma'ariv. So you see that you're allowed, that Rav did not stop doing work even after he davened Ma'ariv. The Gemara answers, Amar Rava hu denichnas lahazia. He entered in order to go into what's called a sauna. He went to the sauna part, and this was before the gezerah, the koydem gezerah haba. And this was before the decree that you're not allowed to go into a sauna on Shabbos. And so this is the story of Rav entering a sauna, and it was after he davened Ma'ariv, but it was before they made the decree against it, and therefore it was okay. But what we see from here is that once a person davens Ma'ariv on Friday night, they're not supposed to do work, even though it's not Shabbos yet. What does this mean? What this means is that if you daven Ma'ariv early, is it really night now? Does it become now the next day? I'll give you an example. Let's say it's Passover, Pesach, the first night, and you daven Ma'ariv early. If you daven Ma'ariv early, is it really Pesach night, and you can now eat matzah early? Does davening Ma'ariv make that it's considered night already? And the answer is no. Davening Ma'ariv does not make it considered night. It's only regarding the night prayer. It makes it considered night regarding prayer. It doesn't make it considered night completely. You cannot. What is that?
3 stars.
Right. It's not really the night. It's just regarding prayer, it's considered night. Now, regarding Shabbos, there's a problem, because when you daven, you are accepting the Shabbos. When you so it is considered prohibited to do work afterwards, after you daven. But the actual law of Rabbi Yehuda, if you follow Rabbi Yehuda, and that means that Plag HaMincha is the cutoff time, it doesn't mean that it's night at Plag HaMincha. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're going to daven Ma'ariv early. So you're going to daven Ma'ariv early, And Plag HaMincha, let's say it's a day that's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So when is the Plag HaMincha? 4:45, right? 3:30 is Mincha. An hour and a quarter after Mincha is Plag HaMincha. So 3:30 plus an hour and a quarter is 4:45. 4:45 would be your cutoff time. That's Mincha, you've davened before 4:45. In Ma'ariv, you can start at 4:45 and then and then you can have Shabbos early. I'm just giving as easy example. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. is sunrise to sunset, and you have 4:45 is Plag HaMincha. Now, you're going to daven Ma'ariv any time after 4:45. Let's say you daven Ma'ariv at 5 o'clock. Would you be allowed to drive at 4:47? At 4:50? It's after Plag HaMincha already. It's after Plag HaMincha. Is it nighttime already? Are you not allowed to do work? According to Rabbi Yehuda says that you brought the afternoon sacrifice until 4:45. So that means you daven mincha until 4:45. Does that mean night really began at 4:45? Not really. Regarding prayer, that's when it's considered night. But it's not the rule. It's not night already. It's not 100% night. And therefore, it's only night regarding prayer. Therefore, you would be allowed to do work until you daven. When you daven is when you're accepting Shabbos. But 4:45 doesn't mean that it's night already. It's only night regarding prayer. And I'll give you a proof. When is the earliest time you're allowed to light Shabbos candles? The earliest time you're allowed to light Shabbos candles is Plag HaMincha, 4:45. That's the earliest time you could light Shabbos candles. Now, if you are going to follow Rabbi Yehuda, when do you light Shabbos candles? What time? You have a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. sunrise to sunset. Plag HaMincha is 4:45.
So 4:45, you light the candles.
4:45, you light Shabbos candles, but it's Plag HaMincha already. It's already night. Plag HaMincha, in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, it's night already. How could you light Shabbos candles? It's already night. The answer is that it's only night regarding Ma'ariv, it's considered night. Regarding the prayer, it's not night regarding Shabbos. It's not considered night. Shabbos didn't enter 4:45. If you daven Ma'ariv, then Shabbos enters. But Plag HaMincha begins it's night regarding prayer. But you're still allowed to do work until you daven Ma'ariv. It's not fully night. It's night regarding prayer. And now, there is an issue that a lot of the commentaries talk about, the big halachic commentaries, the Trumas Hadeshen, bring down the big problem. There are a number of problems with regard to Ma'ariv. Many shuls daven too early. If you go around, you will find that shuls have a big problem. The community is not as they're not as religious. They don't have as much time on their hands as people in yeshivas. So in yeshivas, you're all set. You can daven Ma'ariv exactly at the right time, no problem. But at people's personal life and their family dynamics and so on, things don't always work out the way the shuls, the way the davening is set up. And it doesn't work out that you daven exactly at the right time. So what are shul supposed to do? Let's say we call mincha today. Today mincha is, let's say, 7:45. It's going to be very hard to keep them until 8:20, 8:30 to daven Ma'ariv. They don't want us to come for, they're not coming for an hour. We came for an hour in the morning. We're not coming an hour in the afternoon as well. So, you want to do mincha, we'll do, they're not interested in waiting. They don't want to wait in between. And you have this problem, especially in smaller towns where there's not many options. You could hardly scrape together a minyan. And so shuls have a serious problem. Then they also have another problem. They have another problem is they like to make a set time all year round. Even if they don't daven every day, let's say it's only Friday night, they want a set time all year round. The whole winter is going to be this time, the whole summer, even if they divide it once, let's say, but the whole winter is 5 o'clock is mincha. The whole summer, let's say, for, they want it to be 7 o'clock, 7:30, they want it set. So you have that, shuls have this serious problem, what to do, especially because, even if they want to follow Rabbi Yehuda, which seems like a good option, but it doesn't always work because it fluctuates. The fluctuation messes things up. So there are, believe it or not, there are some leniencies. The number one leniency is that if you're not going to get a minyan, you can even do what's called a tarti desasri. You could do what we said before that you can't do on the same day. Contradiction. You can, if there's a minyan and you're not going to have a minyan later, and the shul people maybe won't daven, whatever it is, you could do a tarti desasri, a contradiction. You're calling it day and you're also calling it night. You daven mincha, you daven ma'ariv after, and goodbye. You could do such a thing. I must preface that this is all regarding davening. Do you need to say Shema later? Of course. You'll need to recite the Shema in its time. But here we're just talking about the davening mincha and ma'ariv, and you're davening mincha too late, you're davening ma'ariv too early, you're davening mincha and ma'ariv in the same time period, and so it's either day or night, and there's no way to divide it and say, well, the first part was day and the second part is night, because no opinion really makes that separation. And yet you're going to be davening mincha and ma'ariv in the same time period, and we are going to say, well, it is accepted in a shul because they need for the minyan, and people, you're not going to be able to gather them together afterwards, so on. And so it is allowed. There's allowed to do what's called this contradiction in terms. You're doing mincha and ma'ariv, and you're calling it day and night at the same time, and that is acceptable in such a scenario. So that's one leniency. There are other leniencies which are not well known, and I want to mention them to you, not because I think someone should follow them. You shouldn't follow them, but when you learn our Gemara, it makes a person think that, oh, that is absolutely not acceptable. And it's not acceptable, but there have been rabbis that have looked to try to find some type of leniency they're not, that to sort of, to be like a Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev and try to find something positive about what they're doing, find some type of loophole to say, well, what they did is not totally wrong. Because you have to understand, this is an issue that is very common, and many shuls, seem to be doing this type of a thing, davening mincha and ma'ariv at the wrong time, and because it's too late otherwise, and so on. So is there anything that they can rely on? Again, we're not advising someone to rely on it, but it's important not to badmouth, not to say that there's no source whatsoever. There is a little, leeway here and there between some of the great rabbis have tried to find some reason for what they're doing is not totally wrong. So one of them explains that it's brought in well, first of all, the Trumas Hadeshin says if you have no other choice, and you could even daven with them, even though they're davening ma'ariv. Again, we're talking about they're davening ma'ariv before plaga mincha. I mean, this is really early. You're davening ma'ariv way too early. It's before plaga mincha, and Trumas Hadeshin says that it's very shocking that they do it. In the end, he writes, if a Talmud Chacham can't prevent himself from helping out, from being part of their minyan, and He can't stop them. He can't stop them from davening. Then he should daven with them and not separate. Al tifresh minat tzibor. Don't separate from them, and unless he normally separates from them and davens on his own, and does other separate, then isn't normally part of that group. But if he's normally part of that group and they're davening early, and he can't convince them to do otherwise, he should daven with them. It's shocking, but he writes this, and of course he should say Shema. He doesn't write. He writes that he should daven with them. That's what he writes. Now, the Pnei Yeshua tries to explain that the time to daven Ma'ariv is based on the limbs of the Avarim and the Padarim, the fats in the limbs. Now, when were they brought? So they were really brought from the 7.5 hours in the day. In other words, that was the common time. That was when it was slaughtered. So what comes out is that there is some leniency that you could even start from that hour. And so there is such a option of davening even before Plaga Mincha. Which is quite surprising, but it's important to know that there is discussion about it. So again, it's a Trumas Hadeshen, which is he says to daven with them, shocking, and then the Pnei Yeshua gives a little explanation of the fact that it's based on the limbs and the fats. Okay, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but anyway, that is a important to know that that shuls that do this. They do have a little slight leeway, some type of loophole, and we can't, it's obviously not the appropriate thing to do, but there might be some way of understanding the Gemara differently and allowing that. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sei
Can
gesund.
we say Kvod Arav instead of Mar? Does that replace it?
Yeah, it seems like they're both are acceptable. Shalom Alecha Rebbe is one option. Mi Badal Mar is another option. So the Gemara seems to interchange the two. Master, Rebbe, both seem to be interchangeable.
Because I hear some people say Kvod Arav.
Right. It seems like they're interchangeable. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Sei gesund, everyone.